It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story.
13 votes in favour, 0 votes against, 2 abstentions.
Finally, united at the United Nations. The vote for unhindered humanitarian access to Gaza, but no immediate ceasefire. Aid at scale needs to be allowed immediately, says the resolution. Israel says it failed to focus on freeing the hostages. Also tonight, the alleged abduction of teenager Alex Batty now being investigated by police as he sends a message to the mother and grandfather he left behind.
I tell him I love him, tell him I'm sorry for leaving, but it was necessary for my future.
Inside the search for the Prague gunman, as the police say unbelievable quantities of ammunition were found at the scene. Why millions of travellers so far seem to have avoided the Christmas transport crunch. And
last Christmas I gave you my heart, but the very next day you gave it away.
we all know the words nearly 4 decades on, why Wham's Last Christmas is finally top of the festive charts. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30. Hello there, good evening. America has twice blocked action at the United Nations since the war between Israel and Hamas began. Tonight, a third veto was avoided as the Security Council signalled its support for a move towards a ceasefire and much more aid for Gaza. The question, how quickly and how much? Well, after days of negotiations, UN Resolution 2720 was adopted. It calls for urgent steps to allow safe, unhindered humanitarian access to Gaza and to create the conditions for a sustainable cessation of hostilities. Our correspondent, Nicole Johnston, reports now from the Gaza border and saw the challenge that the aid operation faces.
Jabalia refugee camp in North Gaza, where the war never seems to end. Israel has been dropping bombs here for weeks. This woman keeps saying, "They bombed us, they bombed us." Look, this is my Uncle Salem. Record this, let people see. There's no dignity in a death like this. These men say more bodies are buried under the rubble. The UN says nowhere is safe. And across Gaza, desperate demand for food, water and medicine. It's hard to find and costs a fortune.
I go to the market looking for canned food, but where do I get the money to buy it? The Israelis forced us from one place to another, and now I can't survive. I can't get food for my children.
But on the edge of Gaza, a small sign of hope. Israel's Kerem Shalom border crossing. Aid trucks are now entering from here, dozens a day. But Hamas says this week Israeli forces killed the head of the crossing on the Gaza side in an airstrike.
The IDF attacked Hamas militants that came with weapons to our border. The IDF does everything in our power from one hand to reach our objectives of demolishing the terror regime of Hamas while operating this large-scale humanitarian operation.
But to Gazans, this isn't enough. They want Kerem Shalom crossing fully opened. It is the main commercial crossing into Gaza. It's the only one that can take hundreds and thousands of trucks into Gaza to try and help the situation there. Help must come fast, but diplomats have dithered. After a week of debate, the UN Security Council has finally passed a resolution to increase aid to Gaza, but not to end the war.
Today, this council called for urgent steps to immediately allow safe, unhindered, and expanded humanitarian access. and to create the conditions for a sustainable cessation of hostilities.
It's not far enough for the UN Secretary-General.
A humanitarian ceasefire is the only way to begin to meet the desperate needs of people in Gaza and end their ongoing nightmare.
Back in Gaza, people wait for food. They wait for the war to end. And the longer it drags on, the more they lose hope. Nicole Johnston, Sky News, Jerusalem.
Well, that vote at the United Nations tonight was the first to pass on the Israel-Hamas war. Our US correspondent Mark Stone is in Washington for us. So, Mark, progress, but how quickly will action over aid and the conditions for a ceasefire actually come?
Well, that's the question, and I don't have an answer. I've been trying to press contact diplomats up in New York to see what their assessment is of what happens next. And the answer broadly is as soon as possible. But as one diplomat put it to me a little earlier on, this resolution is messy and it is complicated. Yes, it's positive in the sense that it is now talking about speeding up the process of getting aid into Gaza. Yes, it is now talking about appointing a single figure, a figurehead, a UN person, someone from the UN who can coordinate the movement of aid into Gaza. All that is positive. But the only reason, Anna, that this resolution was able to pass is because it didn't contain the word ceasefire. And the reason it didn't contain the word ceasefire is because the diplomats around that table knew that if it did, America would veto it. Why would they veto it? Well, because they still believe that a ceasefire would benefit Hamas and the status quo would remain. But it is interesting that every other country around that table believes that a ceasefire is now required. America is alone. And I think, Anna, that is the other takeaway from this. I was watching the news conferences that were given in those moments after the vote came in. And it was very telling because you saw the group of Arab nations together. In the middle of them, the diplomat, the ambassador from the United Arab Emirates. It is her country that has driven this resolution forward. And you do get the sense, and I felt it so much over the course of the past few weeks, that American leadership that we have been used to for so long is absent. America does not have the influence that it once did. In terms of what happens now, well, the UN is only one part of this. In Doha, in Cairo, elsewhere too, negotiations are ongoing, and I think that is where we will see a breakthrough on a ceasefire. And there again, America is not centre of those talks.
Mark Stone, live for us there in Washington. Thank you. Now, police in Greater Manchester confirmed today that they have launched an investigation into the alleged child abduction of Alex Batty, the teenager who reappeared this month after 6 years missing. He has said in a newspaper interview that it is surreal to be back in the UK and told his mother and grandfather, who he left in France, that leaving was necessary for my future. Our correspondent Sajid Chowdhury has more.
2,269 days missing. But in a note left behind for his mum, Alex doesn't say why he finally fled. Instead, the boy, now 17, told a newspaper harsh living conditions drove him to escape.
It was a lot of construction work, demolition work, decoration work, painting walls, renovation work. I had a non-existent social life, to be honest. I would as much as I could, I'd try and play video games online because I had a couple online friends, but, you know, you can't really class them as friends, can you?
Alex Batty was 11 when he and his mother went missing. Last week, he left in an escape, now making headlines. His unbelievable journey, now followed by an unbelievable reality.
Being back with my grandma feels quite surreal. Every time I go to sleep, I feel like I'm going to be waking up back in France. It's not really kicked in yet that I am back in England.
And back in his previous hometown of Manchester, police there have spoken to him. Alex's disappearance is now the subject of a criminal investigation launched by Greater Manchester Police.
The first step in the case actually coming to criminal courts with Alex's mother coming back to this country. And that would have to be through extradition. It's only a criminal offence if Alex was actually removed from this country without consent of his grandmother. It wouldn't actually be a criminal offence if, as we've read, this was a pre-arranged holiday agreed with the grandmother.
Alex's great escape is beginning to sound not so great. He's admitted making up dramatic stories about his journey so police wouldn't find his mother. If she's watching, he wants her to know this.
I tell him I love him, tell him I'm sorry for leaving, but it was necessary for my future. All's good, happy, very happy actually, healthy. You know I love the cold, so I've got that again. That's it really. You know I can take care of myself, so you don't have to worry about any of that.
The teenager says he now wants to focus on his future, dreams and ambitions, he says, worth leaving home for. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News.
One of the academics who barricaded his students in safety from the Prague mass killer told Sky News today how they hid for an hour before special forces rescued them. Sergei Medvedev was speaking as the names of the first victims were revealed. Police said unbelievable quantities of ammunition were found near the body of gunman David Kozak. Our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons reports now from Prague.
These the scenes as police in Prague pursue a gunman who has launched a horrific killing spree. We've had information that he's on the roof, says this officer. David Kozak is on the balcony and he's firing shots. The police are moving up the building and they go out onto the balcony. They find the gunman has killed himself. Nearby, urgent medical attention. An officer wants tourniquets to treat life-threatening wounds. Among the victims, Lenka Lavkova, a professor, and Lucy Spindlerova, who was a student. Sergei Medvedev was laying flowers today. A professor at the university, he heard the shooting during his lecture and then helped his students to build a barricade.
So we blocked ourselves inside the auditorium. We took all the desks and chairs towards the door, so we blocked the door entrance. I locked the door. An hour later, the special forces broke in for the second time, then lay us all on the floor. And then they took us out of the building, and as we walked down the stairs, there was blood all over the place. There was blood on the stairs, blood on the steps.
Kozak was 24, a history student with no criminal record, but he had built up a cache of weapons and ammunition. His attack forcing some people to take desperate measures to avoid being caught, while others were rushed out in a bewildered crowd. And Kozak is now being linked to the murder of his own father and to this, the killing of a man and his baby last week.
There are relevant indicators and clues that suggest that the same offender was responsible for all three of these incidents.
The police have already arrested at least one person who claimed he wanted to emulate the massacre. People here are anxious. The police say they're stepping up their profile to calm nerves.
This is a city and a country in a state of trauma. At these impromptu memorials, you see tears, but what you hear is silence. But these people know that this dreadful massacre could have been even worse. When the gunman died, he still had a huge supply of unused ammunition.
This is a city with a low crime rate. Kozak's brutal, callous killing spree has come as a devastating shock. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Prague.
The Prime Minister said today that the economy had done better than predictions, despite the prospect that the UK may be on course for a mild recession. That became a possibility after official figures were revised to show the economy shrank in the third quarter of the year. It also shrank in the most recent month covered, October. Our business correspondent Paul Kelso reports from Bristol.
If you can't celebrate this weekend, you never will. And Christmas has delivered the seasonal shock this Bristol restaurant has been waiting for after another very trying year.
In places it's been amazing, and in certain places it's been, this is a little bit sketchy here and there. It's the back end that people don't see, the back of house, it's the, rise in utilities, it's the energy costs, obviously it's the kind of staff costs which is also going up. It's something you can't paint a picture for guests.
It's a recipe for hard work that's been repeated across an economy that's performing even worse than we thought. New data from the Office for National Statistics has revised down growth for the second and third quarters of the year. Growth of 0.2% in Q2, reduced to 0, and in Q3 from flatlining to minus 0.1. These are small margins, but they put the UK on the brink of a technical recession and the Prime Minister, who pledged to deliver growth, on the defensive.
Compared to the predictions at the beginning of the year, the economy has done better, and we've actually grown faster than our European neighbours like Germany, for example. But of course we want to see more growth.
Christmas has also come to the rescue for retailers in Bristol's arcade. Small businesses who've spent the year battling inflation, just like their customers.
I try to plan forward in advance, so I'm already considering next year's wage increase. So I need to adjust the hours of the shop, maybe open a bit longer to get more sales in.
When the system slams you with big energy costs, high is the interest rate, rents go up. Come on, anyone can see what they're doing to the people, innit?
Even in tough times, we make an exception for spending at Christmas. But economically, it feels like the hangover has come early. In truth, we'd expect the economy to slow with interest rates rising. And if there is something under the tree, it's that inflation is falling faster than expected. So this may not last quite as long. The experts know you can't keep everyone happy at Christmas.
There we go.
Come January, belt tightening may be less a New Year resolution than a necessity.
Merry Christmas.
Paul Kelso, Sky News in Bristol.
Well, travellers heading home for Christmas yesterday had to contend with the impact of a winter storm and wildcat strikes. Tonight, for most, their journeys appear more predictable, but there were queues at Dover and traffic jams on major roads like the M4, as our correspondent Becky Cottrell reports.
Kicking off the holidays by getting in the car. Millions making festive trips to join family and friends. But today had all the ingredients for travel chaos, with many people finishing work or school and hitting the road.
It's been busier than we anticipated. We were quite pleased this morning. We had a bit of an uplift around about 6, 7, 8 o'clock, and we think that's probably people taking our advice and doing some of the longer journeys, getting that part underway early on.
National Highways has removed more than 1,000 miles of roadworks on England's motorways to help ease congestion. But at Dover, car and lorry drivers faced long queues following strikes by French workers. As for those travelling in electric vehicles, there were fears following queues like this at charging stations last year.
2023 has been a really great year for EV charging, particularly the rollout of those rapid and ultra-rapid chargers that EV drivers need when they're on longer journeys. And if you look at the numbers overall, there are 40% more units, devices in the ground than there were this time last year. And in fact, recently there was a milestone in the UK, 10,000 rapid or ultra-rapid devices across 5,000 charging locations.
And good news for many rail passengers, with the majority of services back up and running after havoc caused by Storm Pia.
We actually managed to get to the station very early, so we're here an hour earlier than we would have been, so it's worked out okay.
This weekend could be even busier for travellers, particularly on the roads. The advice for those buying some last-minute gifts or trying to get away: get up nice and early or save your trip for later in the evening. Becky Cottrell, Sky News.
Rail passengers in England face an increase in fares of nearly 5%. The price rise of up to 4.9% will take effect on March the 3rd and will apply to season tickets as well as other fares. The US Supreme Court has decided not to agree immediately to a request to rule on whether Donald Trump can be prosecuted for his actions to overturn the 2020 US election results. There had been concern that a legal fight could delay the start of his trial, scheduled for March, to a date after next year's presidential election. And a new piece of work by Banksy showing military drones on a stop sign has been removed from a street in South London. Within an hour of the artist posting an image on social media, two men appeared with bolt cutters who promptly took it away. The Metropolitan Police said tonight they're waiting to hear from the local authority over whether they want to report a crime. The head of the Metropolitan Police's counter-terrorism command said today his officers were very alive to the threat posed by Iran on British soil. He was speaking as a man described as a terror scout was sentenced to 3.5 years in jail for spying on a dissident Iranian TV channel. Our correspondent Milena Veselinovic was in court.
Armed police officers, keep your hands where I can see them.
This is the moment Magomed Hussein Dovtayev is apprehended.
You've been detained in Section 43 Terrorism Act, all right?
Arrested for spying on a dissident Iranian TV station in London. The 31-year-old Austrian of Chechen origin arrived at Gatwick Airport earlier that day and then jumped into a taxi to West London.
Where can I go today?
To the office of Iran International, a Persian-language broadcaster whose criticism of the Iranian regime has made it a target of threats by Tehran. Once there, Dovtayev filmed security on site, walking the perimeter of the building with some effort to disguise himself. He was confronted by security, who called the police. His explanation for filming not convincing officers.
I just filmed this area, this area. Because wonderful.
Today, the judge dismissed this as wholly far-fetched, sentencing him to 3.5 years in prison. The judge said that had Dovtayev not been interrupted by security, he would have passed the video he filmed to those who put him up to go to the site, for them to use it in some sort of a terrorist incident against Iran International. Insignificantly, on Dovtayev's phone were stills and videos of security arrangements there taken by others previously, which the judge said proved that he was trusted to carry out further reconnaissance. He never said who sent him. And no link to Iran has been proven. But counter-terror police say that the threat posed by the Iranian state is real.
So in the past, we have already disrupted 15 plots by the Iranian state to either, injure or kidnap or have an effect on individuals and organisations here in the UK.
In this case, the threat, for now, has been thwarted. Milena Veselinovic, Sky News at the Old Bailey in London.
And finally, nearly 40 years after its release, isn't that guaranteed to make you feel old? The Wham hit, Last Christmas, will be #1 at Christmas. The song beat rivals, including the Eurovision winner Sam Ryder, to the top spot. It's become near ubiquitous in recent years, so much so that it's inspired a festive game to try to avoid it, as our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer reports.
Last Christmas. Try as you might, it's become an unavoidable festive classic. A tune as much a part of this time of year as sprouts are. But in terms of Christmas #1, Wham's classic has always been the bridesmaid, never the bride, until now.
Wham and Last Christmas is your official Christmas #1 today. Andrew Ridgely from the band joining us right now. How do you feel? First time at Christmas being #1. Does it feel like a relief in any way? Does it feel like a big moment?
It is a big moment, and it's a big moment for me and for everyone involved with Wham and George Michael. When Yog wrote this track, he wrote it with #1 in mind. That was the goal.
So how did they do it? Well, after their 5-year dominance of making sausage roll-based puns for charity, Lad Baby dropping out of the running certainly helped matters. Instead, Eurovision runner-up Sam Ryder came the closest to causing an upset, bagging second place, but A for effort after giving an impressive 26 live performances of his new tune in the last 6 days, and getting a little help from the official chart algorithms.
It's supposed to benefit new songs. When they started allowing streaming into the charts in general, the general rule is that they had to, every old heritage song had to sell double 2 per unit of what a new song would sell, just to give the new stuff a chance. But somehow people just want those old songs so much.
Since its release back in 1984, the popularity of Last Christmas has taken on a life of its own. For evidence of its all-pervading dominance, well, look no further than the phenomenon that is Whamageddon, a challenge that's grown in recent years among those in the know who try to do all they can to avoid hearing the song before Christmas, which is virtually impossible. As Northampton Football Club can attest, the ground's DJ forced to apologise for playing it at the start of this month. Around the world, the struggle has been real.
I just lost Whamageddon today. I kid you not, I made it 16 days.
I refuse to lose Whamageddon between now and the 25th.
Last Christmas, I gave you my heart.
It wouldn't be Christmas without it. This year, the song about broken hearts finally gets its happy ending. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Yeah, we've got no hope now, I think. Now it's number 1. Anyway, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we will take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, joined by the broadcaster and commentator Alex Andreou and the parliamentary sketch writer for the Daily Telegraph, Madeleine Grant. And among the stories we will be discussing, this on the front of the Daily Mail, which says King Charles plans to knight the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. Plenty more on that and other stories when we come back.
A new year, bringing with it new hope.
This is incredible.
That's what I like about it.
Give us a song then, Rod.
Good news, it's not extinct.
To start planting a whole new rainforest.
It's really heartwarming to help others.
India, the first to land south of the moon.
The lonelier sheep has been rescued.
Love it. Did amazing.
Best story of the day.
The saying I've got a Sky News break on my own phone.
News never stops.
Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories. The UN Security Council has backed a motion to speed up aid to Gaza, but the wording stops short of calling for a ceasefire. Police have now launched a criminal investigation into the alleged abduction of Alex Batty. He's revealed he lied to officers to protect his mother. And police in Prague have said unbelievable quantities of ammunition were found near the body of gunman David Kozak, who killed 14 people. Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the broadcaster and commentator, Alex Andreou, and the parliamentary sketch writer for the Daily Telegraph, Madeline Grant, with us from now until just before midnight. And welcome, great to see both of you. So to the front pages then, let's start with the Eye, which claims rail bosses are still getting a bonus despite cancelling up to 200 trains a day. The FT leads with US inflation falling again in November, sending stock prices up on Wall Street, closing at a record high. The Archbishop of Canterbury will be knighted by King Charles in his upcoming New Year's honours list, according to the Daily Mail. Sir James Dyson tells The Telegraph the UK needs to focus on growth rather than cutting inflation, praising the policies of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. The Guardian says Labour is considering scaling back plans to borrow £28 billion a year to invest in green jobs and industry because of fears the Conservatives will attack the policy in the general election campaign. The Times reports ministers are pushing for live facial recognition cameras to be used in town centres after trials found they can catch criminals in a fraction of the time that it would otherwise take. The front of the Express features Esther Ranson again, thanking readers for their support as she's battling to legalise assisted dying. The Daily Mirror says travellers are facing a Christmas getaway from hell as road, rail, sea and air chaos even hit the nation this weekend. That is also the lead for the Daily Star with the headline, "Are we nearly there yet?" A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. I'm going to reflect on the festiveness of Saturday's front pages in a moment, but first of all to the substantive matters. And Alex, that vote at the UN, finally, one might say, backing further aid, but not using the word ceasefire, does make the front of The Guardian.
Yes, no, they only said that they want to create the conditions for a ceasefire. And there is a ratcheting of the language, and there is a promise of acceleration of aid, and I think quite significantly, the appointment of a UN coordinator on the ground to facilitate all of that. I mean, I guess it comes back to the question, would it be better to have a stronger resolution that didn't pass or a weaker resolution that does pass? You know, the old adage that if a diplomat says yes, they mean maybe. If they say maybe, they mean no. And if they say no, then they're no diplomat. And I guess the no is what they were trying to avoid here. They were trying desperately to find something to which everyone could say yes. So I think it is minuscule steps, but progress.
There were more abstentions last time, weren't there, including, the UK. So, in a sense, the US is on its own in trying to hold back this idea of an urgent ceasefire. Would that worry them, do you think? Or is it just, they've got Israel's back and that's the way it is?
Would that worry Israel? Yes. Well, I think absolutely it would. This is... They rely very heavily on support from their historic allies, particularly the USA. And actually, Israel may be able to say, for example, truthfully, that the UN has a real problem with Israel, disproportionate actually to any other country in the world. They have more resolutions condemning Israel than any other country in the world, and they would argue that that shows that some of this is an unfair preoccupation with Israel. However, when that criticism is coming from friendly nations, it is much harder to simply dismiss it out of hand.
Well, I mean, Russia, also critical. The UN ambassador called the resolution entirely toothless, accused the United States of shameful, cynical and irresponsible conduct, resorting to tactics of gross pressure, blackmail and twisting arms to avoid a US veto. Of course, the US ambassador absolutely defended it, saying that, it wasn't toothless at all. It was tough, but we got there. And certainly there seems to have been, at least a week and a half of high-level diplomacy, not just at the UN, in Doha and Cairo. It was a tough effort to get there, wasn't it?
The vote was delayed actually twice in order to get there. It was meant to happen on Tuesday morning. And so, yes, you do get a sense of that process. But I think the whole conversation around this somehow proceeds from the notion that if the UN said, you must cease fire, Israel would go, okie dokie then. They just wouldn't. And so it would create actually a worse deadlock than there is now. It is a ghastly situation and a lot of innocent people are dying. But the point is that in order to get to a position for peace, it has to be that both parties in this conflict want it. It can't be because the international community wants it. That doesn't get us there. It has to be because the two parties involved in the conflict are ready to stop fighting.
Well, Hamas' reaction tonight, this is a predictable reaction, I guess. It says that it is an insufficient step, doesn't meet the requirements of the catastrophic state caused by the military machine in Gaza. And, of course, a report released by 23 UN agencies, humanitarian agencies, suggested that the entirety of Gaza's 2.2 million population was in a food crisis or worse, and that more than 550,000 are at the catastrophic starvation level. So that's the urgent part of this, to get the aid in, and in greater quantity as well.
It's absolutely harrowing and terrifying, but it is a bit rich to hear of Hamas talking about the injustice of the situation that they caused by launching the assault on October the 7th, and that they could end by handing over the hostages and laying down their weapons.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll certainly keep an eye on how quickly aid gets in, whether there is a further deal to get the hostages out as well, and if this move towards a cessation of hostilities actually happens as well. In the meantime, let us move to the UK economy. We heard word today that, in fact, we are teetering on zero growth, are we not, at the moment? And this is an intervention, Madeleine, by Sir James Dyson, who, and we heard this during the Liz Truss era, didn't we, that brief era, that he wants to focus on growth, not inflation, in the sense that squeezing inflation depresses the economy, and actually it's now time to reverse that.
Yes, which is quite easy to say when we've fallen from over 10% now to just under 4%. We are sitting prettier now than we were in terms of inflation, but obviously the economy is still in a parlous state. And I think that although, I agree with some of what James Dyson says here, I think perhaps invoking Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng is not the wisest move, given that, they didn't exactly invent the idea of growth and low taxes, and there are many other people who are not so discredited who are also making these points. So to set them up as the unique flag bearers of pro-growth in Britain seems to me a mistake. But I think he does make some interesting points. He says that wealth generation and growth did become dirty words, and I think that is fair to say when you look at how, for a long time, this has been undervalued in all sorts of ways, and not least our inability to build anything. That, to me, suggests a country that is quite willing to shoot itself in the foot.
I mean, Rishi Sunak's obviously got all of his targets, of which he's not meeting most of them, apart from the halving of inflation. But many people have said, why don't you just fix certain things? For example, get a deal with doctors in order to at least get the NHS functioning as well. Whether we get more tax cuts as well in the spring budget, would that, push growth? Is it time to move away from this focus
practical solutions, I think, is what's lacking, instead of grand ideological statements, prioritise this versus that. We are now in the fourth round, I think this is, of getting one set of data that kind of goes in the right direction. Sometimes it's growth, but inflation goes the other way. Sometimes we get good news on inflation, but growth goes the other way. And that's because those two things are related. They're a seesaw. If you're trying to suppress inflation, you will suppress growth, and vice versa. So, I think what's needed is a little bit of realism and a little less of saying, if the data is good, our plan is working. If the data is not good, this proves we must stick to the plan. And you hear that and you think, well, what would convince you then to tweak the plan? Because you take positive data to mean that it's working and negative data to mean that you must do it harder.
Yes. Yeah. And whether there's a lag, you know, you put interest rates up and only slowly do you get the sort of the things. So whether the lag is already there, whether actually inflation will already fall, but, you know, who knows? But interest rates will still be slow to fall next year.
Also, it is just quite worrying, isn't it, that we seem unable to make very important predictions that will inform public policy, that they so often appear to be completely out of whack. People make decisions based on that wrongness.
I mean, in their defence...
And then we play catch-up.
In their defence, this is because this particular crisis is being driven by so many external factors that whatever predictions they make, they won't affect the fact, you know, that ships now stopped collecting oil from the Red Sea.
Yeah.
How will that impact inflation in 2 or 3 months?
But you're quite right, because it shouldn't be a sort of coming in with the tablets of stone. I think these things should be taken with a pinch of salt.
My old economics professor used to call it a wobble board. You have to balance, you know, like in the gym, you have to balance, and the only way you can do that is by having a strong core.
And the whole point is that the Bank of England was criticised at the start of this by pushing up interest rates probably too slowly, and actually suggested its modelling might have been wrong. So that's you know, that doesn't give you so much confidence, does it? In that. Anyway, let's go to the Daily Mail. I have to say, there's a very festive theme to lots of these newspapers, apart from Wham on the front, which no doubt we'll get to. You know, there's a lot of you know, your 2-week TV guides and your how to cook a turkey. And Madeline, it's worth, you know, somebody who's in the newspaper industry, this is a really big selling weekend, isn't it, for the papers, don't you think? Getting all these extra bits out there for everybody.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, because people go home and they finally have a bit more time to sit and read things. And puzzles always do extremely well, because it's something that families can do together. Once you've run out of small talk. It's certainly what we do in my family.
And the New Year quiz.
And the New Year's quiz,
exactly.
yes.
But at the moment, it's the TV guide, which obviously... but anyway, let's go to the Daily Mail, which is Charles tonight, Archbishop Welby. And, of course, we've got the New Year's honours coming up, haven't we?
Yes, that's right. And the Archbishop of Canterbury is to be knighted by the King for his personal service to the Crown. So this was not in the kind of politician honours. This was in the King's birthday honours. And this is an interesting story, because on the one hand, Justin Welby is obviously a public servant of great standing. He's been Archbishop now for 10 years, and he was heavily involved in the coronation of the King. However, at the same time, you know, there has been a lot of criticism, obviously, from the Conservative Party, but many people in the Church of England have been highly critical of Justin Welby too, for what some see as a kind of technocratic approach to the job, and also for his decisions during lockdown, where there was great criticism of the decision to not just prevent church services from happening in the normal way, but even preventing priests from actually going into their own church on their own and just praying for their congregation there. Many people felt that went way too far. So this is an interesting choice, but actually not really that controversial for someone who's been doing it for such a long time.
Well, such a long time, but also with seismic moments, you know, for the royal family. The death of one monarch and the coronation of another. They would have interacted so much more than you would normally expect to see.
That's true, actually. They would have got to know each other very, very well. I mean, I guess you could flip this subline, King honours man who crowned him, despite his attacks on Tories. You could flip it and say, well, what would he do? Not knight him because he's been quite political, because that would seem to be the most political move of all. You know, he's clearly earned his dues, a lot more than some people that we see being honoured and elevated to the Lord.
We have to remember, you've got a monarch who's trying to suppress their own political, you know, interventions, haven't you? So
Good doing a great job,
probably understand, I think, probably. In the meantime, let's go to The Guardian. Labour may curtail its Green Plan to avert Tory attacks. This is fascinating, isn't it? Because they already feel like they've scaled it back in terms of time frame. Labour considering scaling back ambitious plans to borrow £28 billion a year to invest in green jobs and industry. So anybody voting for Labour, hoping to get more net zero ambition, might be disappointed, Alex.
And it's interesting that 2 days ago I was reading a story about Labour being in contact with the White House and the strategists for Biden there, giving them advice from their experience of the last American presidential election, saying, You have to make yourselves as small a target as possible. That is the name of the game, to give as little to attack. Don't worry about anything policy-wise. The name of the game is to make the target as small as possible, and I think this is what's happening here.
But see, Biden could do that because it was a COVID year, and if he wasn't making appearances all the time, then actually that felt acceptable. Whether it will going into 2024, who knows? But certainly that does, that is what the advice to Labour has been, isn't it? Go small, as it were.
Yes, and also keep the purse strings as tight as possible. This is Rachel Reeves' big thing. There have been a few occasions where Labour ministers shadow ministers have gone on the radio and they've kind of said they've misspoken and promised some kind of spending pledge that's not actually been approved by Rachel Reeves, and then they've come down hard on them again. This is that they're trying to be very careful, but it does sort of beg the question of, what is politics for? If we end up with, Rachel Reeves is basically doing an identical economic policy to what the Conservatives are currently doing now, is that really going to animate people? You get Jeremy Hunt in a wig, But on the one hand, it's interesting that they fear the Conservative attacks, supposedly, as much as they do, given the state of the polls. But on the flip side, you could argue that perhaps the state of the polls has emboldened them now because they don't have to say, for example, if we upset the left of our party, we don't have to worry about it as much as we might have done if we weren't 20 points ahead in the polls.
Yeah, and this idea of sort of effectively going limp in terms of policy and not coming out, not out, does that force the Tories to flush themselves out and bring in those dividing lines like Rwanda, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the Tories need any help. They just need Labour to stay out of it while they're having this bun fight. But there is another aspect to this, which is, I think, after the years we've had, I think people are quite cynical about policy promises.
Yeah.
And so to a large extent, you're in a hiding to nothing to make a big costed policy promise, which everyone can then attack. And if people don't believe you will deliver it anyway, I think COVID, Ukraine, what they prove is that whoever goes into number 10 has to throw the plan out pretty much on week 2. And what they're interested to know is what are your priorities, what are your values, rather than specific costed policies.
Yeah, it's a firefighting job, isn't it?
It's a sort of vibes election.
Yeah, we'll have to get a manifesto at some point.
How terribly depressing.
Anyway, lots more still to come, including this on the front of the eye. UK's worst rail firms cancel 200 trains a day, that is, but bosses still take their bonuses. This is after the prices go up too. Back with that in just a moment.
We've done nearly 9,000 hours of rescue this year. When we're an all-volunteer team, so that puts quite a strain on all our team members. So yeah, we're looking at ways of reducing that number and keeping people safe on the hills. It has been tracking the number of visitors in the last few years. This increase over the last year, we don't really have enough data as to why that sudden increase of 25%. But generally, Snowdonia is getting a lot more visitors, and that just reflected in the amount of rescues that we're carrying out. If they're on the mountain, they're part of the mountain community, even if it is just their first time, and we will step in and help out. But we are looking at other agencies as well, working with other agencies to maybe see if we can do something to reduce the low-level rescues that we have to carry out as well. People who are not mountain aware don't realise the change in the weather from down in the valley to the summit and back again, and how that can change, not just with the altitude, but during the day. So you could start off on a nice sunny winter's day, and by 3 or 4 o'clock, it's getting dark, the weather's closed in, you can't see where you're going, and suddenly it's sleeting and snowing. And yeah, that can make a big impact on people's confidence and their ability to get off the mountain. We don't advise people not to go in the mountains. We don't see ourselves as gatekeepers. The mountains are a great place to get fit. It's acknowledged that spending time outdoors is great for your mental health. So we're certainly not gatekeepers. We just want people to ask some very simple questions about, do I know where I'm going, what I'm doing? Have I got a plan for the day? Have I got a plan B for the day? do I know what the weather's doing? Not just what it looks like outside when I start, but what's the weather planning to do? Bearing in mind that the mountain weather can be pretty unpredictable. And finally, do I have the right gear? And if you ask yourself all these questions and you find some of them you're not sure, then see what you can do to address it or come up with a different plan.
Hello there, welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me once again, commentator and broadcaster Alex Andreou and the parliamentary sketch writer for the Daily Telegraph, Madeline Grant. Welcome to both of you. Parliament's off and you're still here, still working, so that's, grateful for that.
Just about.
Losers, that's what you're trying to say.
No, not at all. No. So let's get to the I weekend, which is all about rail, on a day where England found out its fares were going up by 4.9%, I suppose predictable because of inflation, but we're still seeing 200 trains a day cancelled, and the subject of their article is that, bosses are still taking their bonuses, Madeline.
This is the thing, 4.9% is a kick in the teeth at the best of times, especially if you're a commuter who has a season ticket and it's already a big part of your day-to-day expenses. But, it'd be one thing if the trains at least ran on time and they were kind of vaguely hospitable places, but it's sort of like you pay through the nose every year to have a kind of, the cattle cart experience. I'm travelling back home tomorrow morning by train and I'm sort of hoping it's not going to be too awful. But it really is shocking. I also wonder if, they may actually, by constantly putting up the prices, these rail bosses may be slightly signing their own death warrant, because already, working from home has exploded over the last few years. And if you make commuting that unpleasant, I expect you will find that there are more and more people who start to demand and look for jobs where they can work from home more. So the revenues will go down even further.
Yeah, it's really difficult, isn't it? Because obviously there's the rush at certain times of the day still, but the rest of the schedule still has to be run, even if the trains are half or even a quarter empty. So this is the great dilemma of public transport, isn't it?
Yesterday, every single train was cancelled out of Paddington, I think, because there was a bag up on the overhead cables, a sort of shopping bag, blue on the overhead, and every train was cancelled. And all of this adds up. It adds up to a sort of general grumbling and agitation. I don't commute, but I know from everyone that commutes that their sense is that it's never been as bad. That every time you step on a train, you sort of take life in your hands and you don't know whether you will end up stuck in a field.
Well, you'd have staff shortages and staff sickness as well, wouldn't you,
yes,
through the COVID part. I'm just going to move on, if you don't mind, I haven't got that long. Daily Express are going on Esther Rantzen again and the idea of assisted dying, thanking people who've given support when she needs it most, Madeline.
Yes, so Esther Rantzen has this week launched a new campaign to legalise assisted dying, and she's suffering from stage 4 lung cancer. I think she's a very brave and national treasure, really. And it is such a complex and difficult issue. I'm personally, I think, I always am very aware that for every case, I worry that for every case like Esther Rantzen, where you have someone who is worrying about having a terrible death full of pain at the end of their life, who's in complete control of their senses and knows exactly what they want. I worry, though, that there may also be people who are not in that frame of mind, who might come under pressure. I really worry about the unintended consequences, where in Canada, where assisted dying came in a few years ago, this extraordinary slippery slope has occurred, where now almost 5% of all deaths that occur in Canada are happening with made, as it's called, and it includes people for things like people who can't get welfare support, people who are homeless, and this kind of thing. So I would really... We need to have a public debate about this, because it's very popular, but we really need to think about what the safeguards might be that could protect against that.
We've run out of time. I just want to show you the final picture we were going to do, which is on the front of the Daily Telegraph, which is, of course, that Last Christmas is finally a Christmas #1 for Wham. Last Christmas #1. We'll talk about that, no doubt, next hour. Alex and Madeline, thank you both so much. Thank you. See you for the 11. Right now, here's the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So the jet stream heads south in the run-up to Christmas, allowing more unsettled conditions to spread in from the Atlantic. A wet morning for Scotland with snow over the higher ground, the risk of some freezing rain and ice. To the south of the rain, mild but large amounts of clouds, some patchy rain and drizzle over western parts. Wet weather will return to Northern Ireland and Northern England through the morning, some heavy.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.